What I'd like to demonstrate for you in this video is how to use the CSS development tools that are built into your web browser. As you can see, I've got the virtual machine booted up and Tethys is running in the background, and I've already pulled up the Earth Engine app. I'd also like to demonstrate two different ways to develop CSS. The bad approach, or at least in my opinion the bad approach, and my recommended approach that involves using these built-in CSS development tools in your web browser. So, first, the bad approach. And what we're going to use for an example is this title in the nav. You may or may not have noticed, but it is not left justified like the rest of the labels and controls in the nav, and it's probably not quite big enough to be considered a label for our navigation. This has always bugged me, but I'm a little obsessive compulsive. So, in the bad approach, what I would do is I'd go directly to my code, open CSS, and the map CSS is the file we're after. Then I'd enter the selector. You may be wondering how I know what that selector is. Well, here's a hint. I used the web development tools, but let's pretend I knew what the selector was already for the page. Say it was some HTML that I was developing. And I would adjust it. So first of all, let's take care of that left justification. Now if I look at the page, it could be one of two things that's giving us that space. It's either the margin or padding on this element. And without using the development tools, I don't really know, so I'm going to guess. Let's try padding, and I only want to affect the left side, 0. Okay, and I'll save that and refresh the page. Okay, I got lucky. So it turns out it was the padding. So now it's left aligned, but I want it to be a little bigger, maybe more bold. So I go back to my code and I say font size 24 pixels, or maybe let's start a little smaller, 18, and refresh the page. Okay, that's a little bigger, but maybe I'd like to try something else like 20. Okay, that looks good. So you can see in this approach I'm going back and forth between the browser and my code, and I'm refreshing a lot. So now I want to make it a little thicker. Font weight, let's just make it bold. Refresh the page. There we go. I can live with that. That looks good. But in order to get here, I had to first know what the element selector was, the long string of text, right, that I had to know to select that element, the incantation, if you will. And then I had to go back and forth between my code and the browser, refreshing multiple times. This approach, especially, this was a relatively simple example, but when you have complex styling operations, this is going to really slow you down. So let me show you the dev tools that are available in your web browser, and then I will show you how to use them for a better approach. The development tools can be opened by pressing F12 or Control-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I if you're on a Mac. I prefer F12 because it's consistent across all the platforms and many of the web browsers that I use. First thing I will show you is that in this dot menu, you have options to dock the development tools window to different locations on the page. This is important because sometimes the width of the screen is adjusted and affects how you're styling things. I'm going to dock at the bottom for now. There are three things that I want to show you in the development tools. One is this Elements tab, which shows the HTML as it's currently rendered. The second thing is the Styles tab over here. This shows a list of style rules that are applying across all files that are loaded on this page for the currently selected element. I can more easily select elements using this tool here, and then hover over elements, will highlight them, and I can select them. As you can see, our rule and map CSS that we just wrote is showing up here for that title element that I just selected. Finally, there's the Computed tab, which is useful for looking up the current value of any style, and you can search it. So for example, the font size, is 22 pixels. This saves me from having to sort through all the rules and figuring out which things are overridden and which things are not. There's also a nice diagram of the white space around the element. The inner box indicates the size of the element content. The green box is the size of the padding around that content, which is inside the element. If I skip to the margin, recognized as the orange box, this shows the space outside around the element. So all very useful tools while you're styling different elements. Now with that introduction, let me show you my preferred approach for developing CSS. First, I'll go to the code editor and remove what we had before. Then I go back to this development window with the developer tools. And here you can see that it's reset to what it was before. So instead of going back and forth, what I'm going to do is first copy this selector, since that's the element we want to target, press the plus button to add a new rule, and then paste it here. Now I can click into this box and start adding rules. So for example, the font size, I could set to 18 pixels, which is what we set initially. But one thing that's useful is I can click in this box and use the arrow keys to increase or decrease those 1 pixel at a time, and the display is updated in real time. So I can get the size of this to just what I'd like. And now that I'm looking at it this way, I think I actually like 24 pixels. Then I can go set the left padding, right? Padding left to 0. And then finally add the font weight bold. Great. So that was much quicker, but we need to be careful because these rules are not saved yet. They're only in the web browser. When I refresh the page, they'll go away. So I'm going to select it and copy it. See, if I refresh, the rules reset. But since I copied it, I can place it in my code. Then I want to go back and just confirm that the changes were persisted. Great. One final thing, let me show you how to get the tools in Firefox. It's the same shortcut, F12 or Control-Shift-I. Great. And it's more or less the same. The tabs are just named differently. So Inspector is the equivalent of Elements, shows the HTML. The styles are just shown as part of the inspector, the list of styles. And then over here, I actually have a set of different tabs. The computed, which only shows a list of the styles. If I click on Layout, that will show me that diagram showing the space around the element. And just like in Chrome, they have this same tool, pick an element, that highlights elements and lets you select them very easily. So that's my overview of using the tools in your web browser. Please do so. It will save you a lot of time and heartache.